Hey there, sinners. It's Adam Knox, and welcome to another episode of The Cult of You and to a new month. It's August, and we get to start this off with the astrologer, Duvendack, as he kind of guides us through the month's predictions. Now, August is actually a relatively quiet month astrologically. However, there are some very significant elements that happen in it, including, shall we call them, the seven deadly sins. We explore those. We explore the details from Leo to Virgo, but we also go on a little bit of a tangent that I think you'll find very interesting. Because in exploring and diving deep into this month's predictions, we discuss the I.A.O formula in a very interesting way. Something that, as a serious practitioner of the craft, as well as just somebody looking to free themselves from a variety of limitations or old patterns, I think you'll find some incredible value in this segment. So sit back, relax, and remember to live deliciously. Bill, so good to see you. Happy Lammas.
It's good to see you too. Happy Imbolc.
Yeah, slow process. Myself and Raven actually did our first kind of kitchen witch episode recently, where she kind of showed us a little bit of an Imbolc tea, which was kind of interesting to explore. I'm still kind of developing a taste for it, but it's like that opening up with a little bit of a herbal section that we're trying out there.
Nice. Yeah, I saw you advertising it on social media, and if she's doing it, I know it's going to be good.
Yeah, it's a nice kind of expansion, I think, to the pieces. It's actually kind of an interesting idea because I love the notion of we did the tea because again, there's that herbal that it's that entry into the new season. It's that entry of that new spirit of life that's kind of coming in now with this time and with this change. Can we kind of maybe open up our discussion around this? Actually, let's talk a bit about Imbolc and let's talk a little bit about Lammas and maybe their relationship that you can kind of enlighten us a little bit more about.
Yeah, it's really interesting because in the northern hemisphere, it's Lammas or Lunasa, and the word Lunasa is Celtic Gaelic in origin, but it contains the name of the sun god Lu.
Okay.
So this is a solar fire festival.
All right.
And it's all about receiving the fruits of the first harvest.
Okay.
So this is when you start to collect what you've grown in your fields. But by that same token, because it's solar based, it's about shining your best and your brightest. That's actually why I wore this shirt today. It's a little more yellow and a little more in touch with the energy of the day and the astrological sign. But Imbolc is the opposite, where it is opening up to the returning sun after a cold winter. So you're still taking a tally, but you're taking a tally of what got you through the winter and what you need to do better in the coming year. Whereas Lammas, you are seeing what you've got to go through the winter. So that's one big common trait between the two, is it's still about inventory. It's still about an accounting. It is, both of them are fire-based. So they both share that trait of the sun. It's just that with Lammas, the sun is on its way into darkness with the winter, whereas Imbolc, the sun is emerging out of darkness into the spring.
Oh, that's interesting. And that also makes a lot of connective sense, especially with the fire element, considering the period of Leo. But again, we mentioned there's this relationship with Aquarius as well that kind of falls into that. Now that's a bit of I think a controversial subject in and of itself, because again, people, and we've had this discussion on the show before, of where do we follow? Do we follow the traditional based upon the time? What's the impact on the astrology? In the zodiac. What's your 10 cents on that?
Well, it is pretty interesting. We've talked about it before, and it's really an opportunity for magical evolution because Lunasa Lammas is all about the sun, and with the sun in Leo right now, that fits. But in the southern hemisphere, it's all about Imbolc and the kindling of a flame growing into something big. So it's not as solar focused.
Okay.
But then on the surface, that looks like it conflicts with the Leo energy. So there's a lot of ground that needs to get made up by astrologers and magicians to say, well, if it's in the southern hemisphere and it's Imbolc, let's look at more how Imbolc aligns with Leo rather than Aquarius.
Interesting. Yes. That makes sense.
Yeah, and there's just not a lot out there, because what you get is you get people in the southern hemisphere writing about Imbolc and all the traits, which is great, but to my knowledge, very few or no astrologers are really looking in a deep way at the astrological context of that.
Yes.
So it's fascinating to watch it develop, and I do plan on having some things to say about it in the future, probably in the form of a book or writings or something. But it does challenge preconceived notions and preconceived thoughts.
I think it's a very interesting kind of subject to be raised. It's kind of like if you're looking at a typical tarot reading, and a person will kind of throw out the deck, and the symbolism is very much impacted based upon what is in relationship to those essential cards, because that kind of helps with the filtering. I think very much also the same case here, and it's kind of appropriate because this initiatory energy, the solar energy, we can again ascribe to the higher self, the true will, the following and discovering what that true will and that true purpose is. But at the same time, it seems a bit, especially if I'm looking at it from the Imbolc point of view, a lot like the Fool card in the tarot, in that kind of initiatory germinating phase, so to speak. I'm not fully matured, fully realized, but I'm in that initial sense. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. The Fool is actually a real good symbolism set and metaphor set for this particular holy day, because the Fool is all about new beginnings. So for Imbolc, the new beginnings have to do with planting your seeds for the upcoming year. In Lammas context, then, the Fool is all about getting ready to embark on winter.
Okay.
So taking stock and taking inventory of what you've got. So both of them have to do with new beginnings. It's just the psychological orientation of how you apply that or how you interpret it.
Interesting. Almost like a reverse and a divinatory interpretation, so to speak, of the card, depending on where you're positioning yourself at, which is quite appropriate. I mean, we had a slight little pre-chat, before we caught up today. And one of the things that you also mentioned is you pointed out the retrogrades that we've got coming into the month. I think you mentioned Uranus and...
Yeah, Uranus retrogrades in about 2 weeks, but right now we've got Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron are all retrograde.
Oh,
and
wow.
When Uranus when Uranus comes into the mix, then that gives us 6 planets retrograde.
Okay.
And then at the end of September, when Mercury retrogrades for a few weeks, we'll have 7 planets in retrograde.
Sure. So we're going through all the 7 deadly sins, so to speak.
Yes, we are. And I would love to see conversation on the YouTube comments about what sins are prevalent in the world today and which ones are lacking, because the ones that are lacking are an opportunity for development.
Yes. Don't limit yourself.
You're going to be a heretic, go all the way, or don't go at all.
Exactly. I support that statement completely. Like, I mean, that's it. Like, if you're going to be the old LaVey statement, right? If you're going to be a sinner, be the best damn sinner on the block. Don't do things halfway. Like, evolution, revolution has never been done in small bits. Maybe it starts that way, it sparks that way, but it needs the forest fire. It needs, which is kind of appropriate based upon the discussion for those. I think you referred to Lammas very much as almost like bonfire. It's that sacred time, whereas Imbolc is more like that candle flame, that starting of the journey. So this is maybe one can look at the retrogrades and think that this is maybe a negative thing, but this is also the reflection of what is required to start the rebellion, maybe in one's own life. Rebelling against one's previous standards, one's previous limitations, one previous ideal or safety net, comfort zone that one used to live in. And now being pushed forward to kind of challenge that up a little bit. It's an interesting idea. The biggest question, I suppose, is how do we do that? Because I think that I want to raise this discussion because we're moving in from that Leo going into Virgo, which is again that kind of fiery energy, that lion, taking charge. But then there's almost like that a little bit of purity, coming forth, that pure, which also indicates a purification through fire, so to speak. So not
well, I think the starting point for most people would just be look at things in your life and see where you're tired of your own bullshit.
Okay.
People don't do that self-reflection anymore.
Mm.
People will look within and they'll say, oh, I've got this bad habit, or, oh, I could, improve this. And that's fine because that's the seed. But then at what point do you draw the line in the sand and say, I've tolerated this enough?
Mm. Mm.
Now it's time to do something about it or quit seeing it as a negative.
I like that. I worked with a very interesting man many years ago called Pete Roberts. He was the founder, or he was one of the longtime presidents of the Theosophical Society here in South Africa. Very incredibly educated, scholarly, esoteric man. And probably one of the most well-read people that I ever met, especially growing up. He was quite an influence for me. And we had a discussion once, and it's an archived recording that I actually still have somewhere. I should maybe just release it. He's passed on now, but was very active in working in the esoteric currents and influencing things at a global level. But we were speaking about shadow and shadow work, and he said one of the biggest things that people should recognize when they're doing shadow work is not to go create shadows that aren't there, because they get so caught up in that, almost like that person, I need to find the next high or the next issue to resolve, and it's always me. And meanwhile, they're disguising a different thing, kind of a thing. Or they start creating something that wasn't there to be in the first place, and they create an addiction to follow this. And I think an addiction you see very much in the self-help community as well as in the occult community. People are striving for that next high, the next therapy, instead of just realizing. And I think to a degree, Crowley himself was a victim of this, in my personal opinion. It was only, some would say that only later in his years that he recognized the actual state of consciousness that he's accomplished. So, but again, like that's my opinion, my point of view, so to speak. There.
Oh no, I agree with that entirely. And lately, in the last few months, I've been talking a lot more about people that have either unhealed trauma or trauma that's been healed. Their identity is tied up in that. So if you took away their trauma, they would have no identity, which means they would have no sense of self. They can't define themselves without that trauma. And that's a sign of sickness.
Yes, exactly.
Medical professionals say that. So it's not just me talking out my ass. And that's kind of where we're moving to with all these retrogrades. Part of being tired of your own bullshit is saying, okay, I've lived with this, whatever this is, for so long, it's part of my identity. If I look at me without this, who am I? What am I? Like you and me, take my writings away from me, who am I? Take your techno mage from you, who are you?
Yes.
Those are the hard-hitting questions people need to ask and need to think about, and then start acting on it.
It's gold. It's so important, and I think you touched on such a deep subject there. I was spending an evening late night coding, and I needed some background TV, and I put on a YouTube show with the speaker of London Real, the guy that runs the talk show, and it was his kind of journey with ayahuasca.
Mm.
And his journey of being somebody that was purely in the performance fields and success fields. His mentor was the $50 billion man, and very much he's the guy that's always telling people they need to be toughened up and things like that. So an all kind of man's man, like our kind of personality guy back from the day. Not very much, but not somebody that's really dealt with his inner things, so to speak, and trying to make that transition between that feminine energy of ayahuasca and that extreme old patriarchal masculine energy. And it was interesting to watch certain parts of it and recognizing what he was coming up with. But there was one point where he was chatting to a friend of his who was also done ayahuasca. And this man was a professional bodybuilder, a competition level bodybuilder. And he was talking about the most difficult journey that he had with ayahuasca, where when he drank it, it took away all his physical strength. And he was so defined under his strength and his power, which was a very profound moment in like his realization of what if you're not that anymore. And I remember another place where I read this read this and it really resonated. There's a school, obviously in the States, which has controversial mixed views around it, the Ramtha School of Enlightenment with Jay-Z
Mm-hmm.
and I.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, let's be honest, there was some great teachings that's come out of that. I mean, Joe Dispenza's, everyone thinks Joe Dispenza is so great, but if we look, and he is great, he's a brilliant mind, but a lot of his teachings and ideas have correlation to the school. And it's where a lot of his training came from and things like that. And in Ramtha's white book, Ramtha talks about, when Ramtha was a warrior and and it was almost like the final lesson of realization and transmutation was being this great warrior, this great destroyer of nations, so to speak, and then suddenly being injured in battle, and then having to have the woman, which he looked down at that point, having to take care of him. He couldn't use a bathroom himself. He couldn't do that. And it's sometimes we look at people that only get that experience or realization when they're in the later years of their life, because they've held onto that identity so stubborn, and then age, Kali herself or Santa Muerta comes forth and says, I'm going to break that apart before I take the rest of you. And we suffer as long as we're there. And it's the biggest death of the magician. How can we call ourselves occultists or magi if we are defined by any known or dependent on any known version of ourselves? And I think it's a very appropriate time when we talk about these sins. I'm just calling them the sins because it sounds great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, those seven retrogrades which bring forth, and again, like it's the trial by fire. And we have to be able to purify and burn this, because we've seen this in the internet, we've seen this in the forums, we've seen this in the communities. There's always that little one kid or person that has nothing better to do with their life, and they're just ragging, teachers or making up stories or doing things like that. And again, I use the symbolism of the pentagram very clearly, and to me, it's the symbolism of spirit governing over the elements or learning
Mm-hmm.
to redirect, however, and that's still purpose, that's still the true will, so to speak. And when people don't have that will, that true fundamental purpose purely aligned, because they're still it's still the identity, it's who I am, it's how I'm seen, it's this and it's that. That's where I think suffering, that's the root of suffering, as the Buddha said, the root of attachment in and of itself. And it seems to me like a lot of like what we're going through now is a lot about that. It's a lot about that liberation. Am I aligned with my thinking here? What's your view?
No, I would agree with you about that. And we see more visceral examples of this in the workplace.
Mm.
We both know people that have worked their whole professional adult life, and then shortly after they retire, they die.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
This is why it's so important that people know that the only constant is change. And if you don't take the initiative to make change happen, change will happen to you, and it'll be worse.
Yes. Yes. Oh, that is like the most golden and most honest part of this entire thing. And I mean, even in the Hebrew biblical scriptures of the the classic Bible, when Moses speaks to the bush, right? And what's your name? Ayer, which again translates as I will be that which I will be, denoting that the concept of deity is fundamentally the same as the concept of evolution. It's the ever self-defining, self-realizing, never fixed, eternally unfolding and manifesting and materializing, the eternal creative intelligence, so to speak, which is, again, just one of the names of the many paths of the tree of life. But inside of that, it recognizes the danger of attachment. Yet at the same time, if we look at it therapeutically in the teachings of the elements, there is the need for developing a secure attachment. But the only way a secure attachment is developed is when the attachment is no longer dependent on the triggers, the variables, the external factors, the idea, any of these things that can go away. And we live in a society that's so seeped in this, drenched in this coming chaos, which kind of makes me see why they all believe in an Armageddon, so to speak, because they're aware of their own impending doom. It's that pretty girl that has her entire life now set up on her OnlyFans page or Instagram following, forgetting the fact that Instagram can literally close your account just because of too many reports in a day, and your following is gone. It means nothing anymore. You can get into an accident and your beauty can disappear. Your health can be immediately affected, and this thing that you're now dependent on to create your life can go away. Like, I mean, I'm in technology, but there's nothing that stops it. COVID can have a neurological impact. It can impact your brain, or you can get an accident. I can get my hands. There's so many ways that the thing that you're reliant on to maintain your version of reality, your malkuf, so to speak, is dependent upon something or someone else that you ultimately don't have control over. And then people sit and question why they're always inside of chaos, why they're always inside of suffering. So
Right.
in your view, I mean, like, again, like, a lot of people that listen to this are either getting into occultism and they're looking for serious information with good discussion on the psychology and everything behind it, or they're more experienced and they're more open to more complex ideas and concepts from let's say from a kabbalistic point of view, and also from a psychological point of view. What is a useful kind of frame? And if we take these practices, these ceremonial festivals that are going on now, what is maybe something, how can we apply that in creating personal ritual to help
Well,
us?
from a kabbalistic perspective, it should always be remembered Kether is in Malkuth, Malkuth is in Kether.
Mm-hmm.
And one way that applies to this is that if you build your whole life in this certain direction, like you described, and it's taken away or it's altered, that's not death. That's the universe stepping in and saying, you're done with that. Now it's time to go a different direction. And as soon as you start thinking along those lines, you trigger the Kether to come into Malkuth.
Oh, that's a gold one. It's once
And
that
then
thinking changes.
as you develop that, then the Malkuth becomes Kether. Because you're living out the spark of the idea in Kether, but you know that this too will change.
That's so sensible to what we described, or how you described Imbolc as that light flame, starting off, versus Lammas and that kind of grand expansion. And this is so good, because I think right in there you've kind of summarized the I.A.O formula. Because again, yes, it's the morning of Isis. We're and this is a human experience. We're stuck in our biological addiction. So we're mourning the past, the old Osiris, the old form, which must die and must be transmuted. And it's only when the apotheosis comes in, the final death, the final transmutation, that the resurrection is possible. It's that 3-stage formula that is pretty much the key behind all therapy when it works. All magic, when it actually creates that's the formula of initiation, in many levels.
Yeah, and people in the military know the I.A.O formula. They just know a non-esoteric side of it. Improvise, adapt, overcome.
Mm.
Same
Mm.
thing. It's technically still I.A.O,
It is. It
but it's
is.
just non-occult.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I think this is some of the things that are so important. Again, it was something that you highlighted in your Enochian Chronicles when you spoke about the concept of the tetragrammaton being utilized not as a religious concept but as a spiritual technology. And this has always been my core idea, is that I attribute a lot of my progress and a lot of my personal success and insight to the fact that I approached it as an occult scientist. I asked, what is the pattern in Christianity, in Buddhism, in Satanism, in Luciferianism, and magic that makes it work when it works? What's going on internally and externally? If I looked at all things as fundamentally the same essence, what is that? And that's when ceremony started making sense, symbolism started making sense, ritual started producing results, because you could see the same pattern in um, biology, in quantum mechanics, in science, in music, in business. And that's when now you're onto something. Now you're applying this as an occultist and not as a fanatic. You know, not someone still addicted to one of those masks, those shapes, those identities, which is again what Martinism refers to it as in many other traditions. It's the false masks that we need to kind of perceive. And I think that's, again, it's such a juicy subject because once somebody gets this, then I think they get the concept of deity to a different level, or at least stages of deity and how it relates to the yoga of it all, so to speak, which is quite an interesting idea. So
Right.
in that, what's your thoughts on that? Because this is an open one. What is your, because I love that kind of idea of Keter within Malkuth. But from a practical point of view, how can somebody bring that home? Now, let's just say we're going through this month, and they're hitting a retrograde, they're hitting the Uranus retrograde, and it's opening up certain portions which are, again, we know now they're deeply seated in the identity, they're personal aspects of the unconscious that are coming through. We understand there's a lesson in the fire, to burn the fire pure, to go from that Leo almost into Virgo, to kind of follow that transition in our life. Ritualistically, ceremonially, meditation, what are some techniques or something that, because there is somebody out there that's going to go, okay, the psychology is great, but what do I do? What
What
do
do
I
I
do
do
to
with
help
it?
me?
Yeah. Well, something I learned as a child has become increasingly valuable the more I get into occultism. And it's the idea of brainstorming map.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in psychological and personal development circles, it's called a reality map. And it probably had a different name when you were in school, but basically you write a word in the middle of the paper, you circle it, and then you draw a line and you write a related concept. And you do that until you fill the page with all of these concepts that tie one into another.
It's a very Jungian free association kind of process.
Exactly. And now it's been adapted to be a reality map where
Mm.
you start off with your name as you in the middle. And then who are you? What do you do? What do you like?
Oh.
And when I take on students, I have them do this right off the bat, but I don't have them send it to me because I don't care. That's their personal business. But
Mm.
about once a year, I have them revisit it. And a lot of times they'll redo it.
Mm. Mm. That's
So that's
great.
one thing anybody listening to this can do. Write your name in the middle, circle it, and then all these things that you like, all of these things that you do that you strongly identify with, put a little line out, write it, circle it, and just do that till you've got your life dissected on paper.
That's
And
brilliant.
then you can either set it aside and come back to it later,
Mm.
or you can say, well, this is real heavy on this hemisphere of the brain, and it's really light on this. And I
Mm.
will be the judgmental asshole here who says that's a problem. It should be balanced with both of your hemispheres of the brain, because if
Yes.
it's not, it shows you're psychologically sick. And we've all got psychological sickness, don't get me wrong. We all got mental stuff that we're working through. So when I say psychologically sick, it's not an attack.
Mm.
It's just a statement of an observation of a fact.
Yes.
But then when you look at this, you say, okay, well, I've got all this creative stuff. Well, then start working with your logical mind. Start working with your reasoning. You're bringing yourself into balance. And then when you bring yourself into balance, then new opportunities will bring themselves to you. You can explore them. And you might also see that something that you identified with 10 years ago, you no longer identify with.
This is such a useful map. I always, when I start off with a new students, one of the reasons, one of the, quirky messages I tell them to do or exercises, I say, give me 50 reasons why someone would love you, fornicate with you, pay you, whatever it is that you think you want from others. Give me 50 reasons. And the reason I make them do the exercise is because it's such a struggle. Everyone thinks at first, 50 reasons is not a problem. But then I also add to it, give me 50 reasons for every day for the entire week. And you see people cringing inside. And I go like, but what you realize here through this exercise is you get a very clear map of how you actually view yourself and what real level of self-love and self-deserving, as well as what those things are based on. There's a quote that I shared this week where it's about recognizing your own role that you play inside of your own suffering, because sometimes we martyr ourselves in that. We're supposed, and it's so common. I see it, a lot of people coming into the left-hand path, they come from a religious upbringing where they assume the closer you get to God, the more open you are to your demons. All these little narratives in themselves that are, good things, or these extreme things. And I love, I was raised fortunately in spiritualism very, very much, and had the benefit of that thinking. And one of my great spiritual mentors, once said to me that, at the end of the day, there's no specific way spirit has to manifest for you. They're going to manifest based upon the beliefs and the patterns and the program that you've got available inside of your brain. And if you don't like it, do something about it, change it, tell them, find another way. And they will, they can you can have the crazy shaking, and convulsions, or you can just have a quiet trance that's quite comforting. You can have the earth-shattering headaches, or you can just have, beautiful insights and dreams. You're the author of your experience. And it's time to take the pen back. But to take the pen back, you need to first recognize who in your unconscious narrative owns the pen.
Right. And that's something that we talked about in spiritualism, was that spirit or spirits are confined to reaching you through the skill set that you have, just like you said.
Yes.
And people either don't know that or they undervalue it. Because what that means is that if you don't believe that miracles can happen to you, you're not going to have miracles happen to you.
Exactly.
If you're full of self-doubt, you're going to have problems manifesting, not just manifesting physical results, but also manifesting internal changes without the trauma.
Yes.
Oftentimes I'll pray for divine inspiration. I'll pray for that lightning bolt of that aha moment that Crowley wrote about in the poem of the same name. Because I believe that those things can happen. So you can see how people's cynicism creates toxicity. And if you're really spiritualist, if you're really into occultism, you can be cynical, but it should not dictate your beliefs like that, because you're cutting yourself off from anything greater than you.
Exactly. Because again, at the end of the day, we understand that the principle or the basis of occult science is fundamentally a science of vibration. And if our beliefs and our narratives are excluding us from emotionally and vibrationally experiencing the potential realities we desire or states, then we're flawed. And that's, again, why we oftentimes have these elaborate rituals with the invocation and the different deities, because they represent in many ways these states of consciousness that are joy and happiness. So an invocation of Jupiter for me is far more a shift in your psychology to begin to experience yourself as Jupiter. You have this initial attributing things that connect you talismanically to that force in the universe. But then the more you start aligning identity to that force instead of the, I'm my career, I'm my job, I'm that, and you start opening up to that vibration, that's when the insight and the wisdom and the contact with the spiritual intelligence starts to come through. And that even has a hierarchical stage, because it moves out of that spiritual, which is almost that base elemental emotional level, into the intelligence, into the angel or the demon, and up the hierarchy, which is almost from the idea to the intelligence to the experience of consciousness to the reality. And once that's done, you're vibrationally in alignment to that reality. You're creating it. You're now opening up. You are as Jupiter that invokes business, invokes
Right.
wealth.
And a lot of this is sympathetic magic. It's talismanic magic, and I point these out because those are only two different ways to achieve that same goal.
Yes. Yes.
I agree with you about occultism and occult sciences being predominantly vibration based, but they are also predicated on the idea of exploration.
Mm-hmm.
And people forget that. They create their occult life the way that makes them comfortable, and then they create that bubble and never go any further.
Yes, indirectly
I'm
serving one
I'm
of the
I'm,
ideas.
I'm way too thelemic for that.
Yeah.
Book of the Law, Section 1, strive evermore, exceed. Always look at pushing outside your comfort zone. I never knew Star Trek The Next Generation would get stuck in my head when I'm talking occultism, but I see, Jean-Luc Picard there saying, make it so, number one. Let's see what's out there.
Nice. That is, what you're, that is just, it's again, it's like one of those subjects that's just so gold and so important, because it's the elusive obvious. People, we get into these very elaborate ideas of even occultism, and we get this perfect map in our head of how it works and how it should be, and then we end up recreating fundamentally someone else's accomplishments, so to speak, and we're ultimately serving those same identities we spoke about earlier and not freeing ourselves from the box. So
right, exactly. And to be fair, some people use occultism and spirituality to heal wounds and self-development, and they should. But there's no cap on that. A lot of people think that idea that I just voiced is a destination, and it's not. No. It's just the next sign marker.
Yes.
And then you move on from there to the next sign marker. And if you get to the point where you don't have any sign markers, you better start figuring out where the hell you want to go, because life's continuing.
And that's the first house of freedom, right? If we talk about magic as the path of true freedom, that's only when you're there are you actually free to create original reality. And even then, is it really original reality that you're creating? Because you're still digging, you're still liberating yourself even further outside of those degrees of your psychology, your past psychology, all the way down the map. It's an endless adventure, so to speak.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the reasons I love astrology so much, because you could have the same aspect between two planets and signs and everything exactly the same, but once in your life, it's going to manifest differently than it did previously in your life. So it's not a hard science, and people think it's a hard science, but it's not. It's a soft science.
Yes.
At least this way you can say, okay, well, we got this going on. Instead of saying, well, I know what to expect, the proper response is, well, let's see what happens. It's like the ending of the movie of John Carpenter's movie, The Thing.
Yeah.
Let's just see what happens.
I like it. Because I think, again, certainty and uncertainty are two of the fundamental driving human needs. And I think they're almost like the yin and yang of our own psychology, trying to materialize it. But that gateway of Samael is that kind of liberation out of certainty into madness, the garden of madness that leads us up the rest of the tree and the probabilities. And that's the difficult thing, because we don't recognize that the need of certainty itself is the affirmation of existing reality and existing known.
Well stated. Very true.
And then there's no growth inside of a known.
There's a old Egyptian story, and I couldn't tell you the papyri it's from or anything, but it's after the battle between Horus and Set, Set is laying there crushed and defeated by Horus. And Horus is getting ready to give him the killing blow. And Isis stops. Isis stops him.
Mm-hmm.
And her justification is, if we kill Set, we kill that principle of change.
Oh.
We kill that chaos factor. And that's the main way evolution happens.
Yes. Yes.
So Set is allowed to live. People who love Set forget he only exists because of the mercy of Horus. And in this case, the mercy of Isis. In other words, the only reason chaos and change is allowed to happen is because the intelligent innovators, i.e. the Horus, knows that it's a necessary principle for change.
Yes, it's again like one of the concepts of how do we survive a lot of pain is vision. You
Right.
know, if there's which is again Horus, and love, which again is Isis in that sense. When we love the destination of where we're going, we have a more compelling future. Then, you know, if we're not looking at the past as the greater joy, and our vision is not blurred or stuck, you know, there, we're able to survive the pain of the black bridge, you know, through the dark night of the soul, so to speak, as we understand the destination that we're going, and it's self-inflicted, you know, it's self-begotten, so to speak, which is it's juicy. Well, this has been exciting. This is a conversation that got a lot more interesting than I initially thought when we popped in and we spoke about
and the funny thing is a lot of people listening to this may think that it's a tangent, but it's really not, because August is Leo, so it's fire and life shifting to Virgo. If you look at it through Egyptian symbolism, Horus aligns to Mars / the sun with that solar heat and fire. Isis is Virgo. So we're going with those two principles. And oftentimes in modern occultism circles, Set gets aligned with Uranus.
Interesting.
Even though classically and traditionally he aligns with Saturn, he also gets that treatment of Uranus because Uranus corresponds to chaos and things happening out of the blue. And Set will do that as quickly as he will be the Reaper.
Sure.
So we're using a lot of Egyptian motifs here and imagery, but that is kind of what's going on in the sky right now. We're shifting from that fiery exploration into the reaping what we've sown, into the grounding the ideas. It's like you mentioned earlier with the journey of the hero. This month is very much about the hero being the Leo energy, returning home and sharing what they've learned with the community, which would be the Virgo energy.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Virgo is a sign that has to do with being of service to others.
Oh, wow. Okay. Sure. That's
so
brilliant.
all of a sudden things get real deep, but it's an astrological depth where we were talking about it from an occultism Jungian perspective. Yes. It's reflected in the astrology of the month.
Wow. It maps in the astrology, the hero's journey, the psychology, you know, the biology, the developmental stage of a human being. This is profound. Works so perfectly. It's kind of appropriate. The last interview I did in last month was with Valentina, a great Tantra teacher, an old friend. And one of the things that she kept coming back to is you're not supposed to purify or banish your demons. You're supposed to accept them for where they are, as scary as they may be. And it's this concept of maturing. And I also posed the question to her. I'm like, how do you make it through? And she goes like, love, you know, fundamentally love is in this sense truly the law. You know, because you need to love the vision of Horus through the love of Isis more than the pain that you're going through, because only out of that position do you remain present enough to maintain authority and power, to, you know, stay the hand, to understand the process, you know, of what is necessary to come, and bring that wheel back. Oh, this is
right. And Theosophy goes in depth about this with the 7 rays. The energy coming into the solar system is Venusian. So the energy coming into this solar system is love. Ergo, the highest vibration in the solar system is love.
Exactly.
It all gets tied back together.
Exactly, which again is another symbolism of the Lucifer's fall, the fall
Right.
of the light and the 7 rays. It's, again,
Right.
re-indicated. This is amazing. Wow. Paul, I think we're kind of like hitting the end of our time. This has been one amazing discussion. As we close up, is there anything else that we've missed about the month? Just little tidbits or anything?
Well, so on one hand, for those of you that pay attention, just know that this is the last full month before the next Mercury retrograde.
Okay.
Mercury retrograde, September 27th. So August and most of September will be Mercury retrograde free, but around the equinox in September, Mercury's going to start playing a bigger hand. Now we've got the new moon on August 8th. And for those of you that work with the astrological dates of the Sabbats, that is right there with the astrological Lammas instead of the calendar Lammas that we're talking about now. And then the full moon is August 22nd, which is right about the time when the sun moves from Leo to Virgo. So August 22nd, 23rd could be eventful. The new moon in August 8th is going to be powerful, but more for that Lammas Imbolc power. But other than that, and we talked about this beforehand, other than that, it's actually kind of a quiet month astrologically.
Nice.
Yeah, it's been a bit.
Yeah, it's been a lively bit. It's been a busy bit. So hopefully our society just makes a smooth enough transition, through this stage, so we can see what comes up in the following month. But that's a discussion that we'll have, next month.
We'll record that one in about a month from now, because September could be kind of colorful.
Yeah, but we'll be back to make sure that there's some advice and some ideas, and at the very least some understanding of the processes for everybody listening.
Right, exactly. The takeaways from today obviously is the conversation, but also the reality map. Come up with 50 characteristics of how you define yourself, like you were talking about. There's key things in here that the astute listener can put to use and start to implement, because we are getting ready for a seasonal shift, regardless of where you are on the planet.
Exactly. And I think that that's just it. It's one of the things that these seasonal shifts remind us is that it is seasonal. It's not going to end. And as you so nicely pointed, that you weren't describing a destination. It was just a signpost for the next degree. And there's this cyclic nature of this experiences. And the better one, I think, gets at these skills, you're never going to be free from the karma, so to speak, of that reincarnation and that transmutation. But you're going to go through it smoother. You're going to understand it a little bit better. And that's really what I think is the only thing that really makes you more of an adept. It wasn't more initiation lines or more little funny names on your plaque. Although that may give you some more wisdom, it's how do you handle these internal shifts? And I think here's been a lot of tools for any, as you say, astute listener that really picked up on those. So if you are listening, if you enjoyed some of these concepts, please raise some discussion inside of the group or here inside of the chat. If there's anything else you'd like us to dive deeper into, I think that's it for today. Bill, thank you so much for your wisdom and time.
Thank you. It's always great.
Any closing thoughts as we end today's episode?
The only constant is change. Everything's cyclical. So smoke them if you got them, live it up, embrace the sins.
And live deliciously.
Bill,
I'll see you next month.
Sounds good. Take care.
Cheers.
I've always felt a little different, a little uneasy between regular folk, a bit of a dreamer, a lost cause, a little non-ordinary, some would say. I think I've always just been this way. My mother said I was special, my father thought I should be feared. But I knew that witchcraft coursed through my veins the first time I tasted the lips of the goddess inside the rain. Yes, I'm a witch, it's true. And sure, we are the ones who believe in the beauty of nature, who believe in the things science, absent of art, cannot explain, who instead of religion would have romance, And sure, you may think we have lost our way, when in the world of predictable things we have such unfamiliar things that we would like to say. But maybe in a world so cold and alone, a little unfamiliar is exactly what is needed to show us the way home.